You have almost certainly seen e-ink technology today. I mean, if you've ever used a Kindle or a Kobo, you've literally looked right at it. If you've seen those electronic price tags in a grocery store, the ones that don't glow, you've seen it. If you've passed a digital display at a train station that is perfectly readable in full blinding sunlight, that's it too. E-ink is absolutely everywhere around us. But here's the crazy part. Almost nobody knows the company behind it even exists. We are constantly surrounded by this stuff, and most people just assume the tech was an overnight success, or maybe some minor side project of a massive tech giant. But that couldn't be further from the truth. And this is not a story about a product failing, right? The technology works. It's genuinely remarkable, and entire billion-dollar products exist entirely because of it.
So in this explainer, we are going to dig into how genuinely new technology actually gets to market. We're going to cover the near-death funding crises, the bet the farm strategic decisions, and the harsh realities of bringing deep hardware tech into the commercial world. It all boils down to the fundamental question every single technology company eventually has to face. Where in the value chain should you actually sit? To understand the business struggle, we first have to understand the tech. The very first thing to wrap your head around is that electronic ink is not a screen. Not in the traditional sense, anyway. Traditional LCDs emit light. They're backlit. It's basically a lamp shining directly into your eyeballs. They drain your battery constantly because they literally have to keep that light turned on just to maintain the image. And if you take them outside, they are incredibly hard to read because you're forcing a small light source to compete with the actual sun. E-ink is fundamentally different. It's reflective, like real paper, not emissive.
The microscopic magic making this happen is just incredible. E-ink relies on millions of tiny microcapsules, and each one is roughly the diameter of a single human hair. Inside each of these capsules, floating in a clear fluid, are white pigment chips with a positive charge and dark pigment chips with a negative charge. When you apply an electric charge, the white chips physically flip to the top and the dark ones sink, or vice versa. The result looks exactly like ink on paper because physically it's working on the exact same principle. And the best part, once that image is set, zero power is needed to maintain it. It only sips electricity when you actually change the display. The potential for this was blindingly obvious right from the start. Back in 1997 at MIT's Media Lab, Professor Joe Jacobson and a couple of his students came up with this. And their grand vision in their original business plan was massive. They wanted to create what they called radio paper, a flexible electronic display that could entirely replace every book, magazine, and newspaper in the world. They calculated it as an $80 billion opportunity. The hype was very real. By 1998, Fortune magazine was already naming e-ink one of their 12 cool companies. But as we all know, hype does not equal commercial success. Fast forward 8 years to 2005. By this point, e-ink had burned through over $120 million in venture capital, trying to pull this monumental vision out of the lab and into reality. Their headquarters in Cambridge still kind of felt like an MIT lab, whiteboards covered in crazy technical diagrams, giant vats of gray slurry everywhere that would eventually become the ink. They were learning a very hard, very expensive lesson about the realities of scale. Because the gap between a prototype that works in a lab and a product that works at commercial scale is brutal. It's widely known in the startup world as the Valley of Death, for a reason. E-ink was trying to solve manufacturing nightmares that nobody had ever solved before. The ink would vary wildly from batch to batch, yields were incredibly unstable, the coatings were totally inconsistent, they were getting bubbles during lamination. At one point, crucial adhesive suppliers just up and canceled their products mid-development. It was a mess, and their cash burn rate hit a terrifying $2 million a month just trying to stabilize the process. But they kept at it, and that expensive, relentless grind actually started to pay off. Get this, back in 1997, the early ink took 300 volts and a full 2 seconds just to change the image on the screen. 2 whole seconds. By 2004, they'd engineered that down to just 15 volts and 200 milliseconds. That is an order of magnitude improvement in performance every 2 years. It's unglamorous, it's difficult, but that is exactly what the actual history of a breakthrough technology looks like. So, having barely survived those core engineering nightmares, CEO Russ Wilcox hits the ultimate startup dilemma. The tech finally works. Sony is practically waiting in the wings to build an ebook. But how do you actually make money off this? Because a cool technology isn't a product, and a product definitely isn't a business model. Wilcox and his team had to figure out exactly where e-ink belonged in the broader value chain.
They had four very distinct paths forward, with wildly different financial stakes. Option one, be a pure licensor. Just sell the recipe for the ink and let everyone else do the hard work. Break even is a mere $5 million. Margins are an amazing 95%, but the revenue ceiling is tiny. Option two, be a material supplier of the ink layer. You get a 50% margin and hit a $300 million market. Option three, build the whole subassembly display module. Margins drop to 15%, but now you're in a $1.5 billion market. Or option four, build the full product. Build the whole ebook yourself. That's a $3 billion market, but it required a staggering $100 million in upfront capital. It's literally an escalating ladder. Every single step down that value chain captures exponentially more market value. If you build the final consumer device, you own the entire ecosystem. But here's the catch. Every step also pushes a cash-strapped startup dangerously close to the edge of a cliff. For e-ink, a company already burning millions just to keep the lights on, the idea of raising an entirely new $100 million fund to start a consumer hardware division, it was a complete fantasy.
Since that massive capital raise was totally impossible, e-ink chose the middle path. They positioned themselves as a materials supplier of the front plane laminate, or FPL. Basically, they decided to manufacture this critical, proprietary ink-coated plastic film and sell it to massive display makers like Philips. Those partners would assemble the full modules and then sell them to companies like Sony to actually put into consumer devices. It was a super delicate balancing act between getting immediate revenue in the door and staying capital efficient enough to avoid bankruptcy.
But even with a viable supply chain finally spinning up, the internal tension never really went away. CEO Russ Wilcox literally said, "We have to continuously look in the mirror and ask if we are doing the right thing." The leadership team was constantly torn. Do they play it safe as a basic component supplier, maybe making screens for digital watches to pay the bills? Or do they bet the farm on perfecting displays for an ebook market that was massive in theory but completely unproven in reality?
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about that core tension, because it sits at the heart of all deep tech innovation. If you were holding a miraculous, literal, world-changing technology in your hands, but your bank account was draining by the minute, what's your move? Do you sell the recipe and watch someone else change the world? Or do you risk absolutely everything to build the future yourself?